episode of Forward Talks. And this is a podcast where I invite alumni entrepreneurs, but now also other guests to talk to them about what we do at Forward Inc., why our programs are important, and what they entail. And today, I have a really, really special guest, Joris Amin. He does a PhD at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam and is a specialist on the subject of newcomer integration, especially through entrepreneurship. So Joris, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do at Forward, how you came across us, and what relationship you have to all of us.
Yes, of course. Well, first of all, thanks for the invite. Really nice to be here. I'm Joris. I do a PhD at the VU, and that's in the area of newcomer entrepreneurship. And yeah, of course, then Forward is the place to be. I've been with Forward for almost 3 years now, maybe even a little longer.
I only realized that today. I always thought that you joined us because you wrote your master thesis on refugee entrepreneurship, and then only today I found out that you were actually a student consultant, which inspired you so much that you first wrote your master thesis on it and then continued to write your PhD on newcomer entrepreneurship.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so I can tell you guys how I kind of got into this area. I guess it was 2015 when we had this refugee crisis thing. That was for me a moment in my life when I was like, okay, what do I want to do? What do I want to focus on? Where do I want to go in my career and things like that? And so in this refugee crisis, I was really kind of fed up with the public debate that we had. It was somewhat toxic, and I think all kind of views were represented in that debate that, well, I personally didn't subscribe to, but I also thought were kind of false. So I was like, okay, maybe what I want to do is generate scientific knowledge, insights, and things like that to kind of course, this debate is good, but let's talk about facts. And so yeah, that's why I was like, okay, I can maybe contribute to that. So yeah, that's how I kind of got into research. That was already, so I wrote my bachelor thesis even was refugee integration. And then during the master's, I did all of my assignments. It was a 2-year research master, which kind of prepares someone for a PhD. I did all of my assignments, everything on in this area. And then eventually someone from the VU approached me. Someone approached me like, yeah, what do you think about a PhD in entrepreneurship? And then you have this refugee integration angle, and I'm an entrepreneurship professor, so maybe we can meet at this intersection, which I thought was really interesting. And that kind of indeed coincided with me finding Forward, interviewed quite a lot of Forward alumni for that.
Yeah, so you've been involved with the subject for much longer than I have been. And this is exactly why I wanted to bring you on the podcast. Joris, a while back, gave the entire Forward Inc. team a presentation and some of the realizations he has had through it. And that's really also what I want to dive into a little bit deeper today. So what inspired you to focus deeper on the topic?
There's a super interesting tension or transition that happens in this area. So even before, when I wasn't focused on the entrepreneurship part, I found that in general, newcomers in the Netherlands, they are quite dependent on a lot of institutions, right? So they have COA, and they have VWN, and they have the municipality, and they have all these institutions that kind of take care of stuff for them. And of course, I'm not judging here. I think a lot of those things are really good. You get housing and you get all of these nice things, but there is some dependency on the state there, which I think it's, every country does this differently, and it has also these different effects. But yeah, if we say with the with the case of the Netherlands, of course, entrepreneurship is kind of the total opposite, right? You have to be independent, and you have to, no one is going to do anything for you.
No
You all
one.
have to do it yourself. Yeah, no, that's the entrepreneurship lifestyle. You have to be, it's all you.
Yeah.
So I think this transition of kind of being in a space where, well, things are often taken care of you, and the state actively does things for you, and maybe you can even say discourages your own personal agency and proactivity. And then this transition to entrepreneurship, I think that's super interesting. Yeah, I wanted to zoom in on that transition and see what happens there. Can we maybe learn from this? Because I think we somewhat have a narrative or a dominant discourse where we might view people as not always being so proactive or being very able to do stuff.
Yeah, this is exactly the key point that you're bringing up, is how to bridge this. First, as a newcomer in the Netherlands, everything is being taken care of for you. And then you want to start your own business, and all of a sudden, everybody expects from you this independence. I wrote my own master's thesis also on the subject. And for that, I also interviewed women that were in a program that was very supportive. While I at first had this great impression of the program, because these were highly traumatized women. It was a program in Germany, and it was great what they did for them. But they also realized after a while that all of this support created this really high dependency on the program and on the social workers that were involved. And once it came to looking for employment, learning the language, it stifled them. It created barriers where it should have had an enabling effect. For entrepreneurs, it's so much harder. It's not just learning the language or writing an application. It's building this entire business from the ground up. What resonated with me was what you said about newcomers' experience in the AZC. So for everybody that doesn't know what an AZC is, it's where newcomers that apply for asylum first have to spend their weeks, months, and even up to years when they arrive in the Netherlands. And you said that interviewing people, it really stood out that was a traumatizing experience, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So that was already something I noticed in my master thesis. So my master thesis was about the challenges in general. That can be like a lack of network or financial capital, all these kinds of things. And of course, mental well-being is, especially in the literature, that's a big thing. And then when I kind of cautiously approached this subject in these interviews, people were, well, I expected them to talk a lot about the experiences they had in their countries of origin. But mostly we ended up talking about their experiences in the AZC, in the Asylum Seeker Center. So I thought that was really surprising. Well, of course, these AZCs, they're often not a nice place. I visited two. They were two former prisons, one in Haarlem and one in Amsterdam. Yeah, of course. I mean, you can imagine people don't often have the nice memories of prisons. They have very limited kind of privacy. I believe a study talks about it as they share their rooms. They have about 5 square meters of personal space, often sharing kitchens and bathrooms and all these kind of facilities. Sound travels easily. They're often secluded from society. One thing that really stood out to me, one example that somebody mentioned, and I think we'll come back to this later, which one I'll say it now, but someone was from occupation, was an electrician and wanted to change a light bulb in AZC. One broke down, and he was not allowed to do that. And there were multiple of these examples where, because they are not allowed, for like regulation wise, they're not allowed to work because that was his occupation. He could not do that. Or for instance, like a barber, cutting hair or whatever.
And yeah, I mean, people have to really imagine that people leave their country and the first place they get brought into is a former prison. And of course, that can be stifling. That is not really where you are your most creative self. And then part of their former identity, for instance, like being an electrician, they can't even change a light bulb because they're just not allowed to. Maybe we can dive into some of the consequences that you face when you are stigmatized as a newcomer and also you are living in conditions that just make it hard for you to integrate into society.
So yeah, this you mentioned identity, and I think that's where the rest of this conversation might go. That's also the main topic of my PhD. So yeah, people are stigmatized. I guess we have this in we notice this in all. This might I cannot imagine this is just the Netherlands, but there's this really interesting paper written by Ponzoni, Gorashi van der Haat. So there's this dominant narrative in our society that these people lack the right skills to be productive in our society. They lack all kinds of things. That's why it's kind of like discourse of lack. And people are also interacted with on the basis of the label that they have. That's kind of the stigma, right? So you're a refugee and we interact with you on that basis. Of course, these institutions, but also people that they just meet. Like people, they often told me in interviews, like, I don't like to mention that I'm a refugee because people treat me differently. They either approach me with pity or they ask me stuff I maybe rather not want to talk about. Being reduced to this one dimension where your character has just this one dimension of being that label, being a refugee, where of course you're a human being and you're much more.
It's this huge group. I mean, they come from all different countries, religions, ages, ethnicities. It's one word to describe this completely versatile group of people.
Yeah. According to the literature, what it does to people to being stigmatized is it impedes your ability to envision who you can become. Yeah, I mean, you can imagine also for entrepreneurs, that's especially important that you have this, that you see yourself as someone who can achieve a lot of nice things. Yeah, I actually have a really nice, and this is a bit unrelated to refugee entrepreneurship, newcomer entrepreneurship, but a really nice example of what identity and being kind of reduced to something else or what it does to you or what it can do to you. There's this paper written by Carl Reich. So he tells this story where there's a group of forestry students in the USA that is assigned to kind of take care of a fire. There's this fire in the mountains in, I believe it was Montana. It's the Fire of Man Gulch. I don't know where exactly it was. And this is a group of students that are there. They're firemen for that day to take care of this. So they go there. They sit down and they go over the strategy, the game plan. Like, okay, how should we approach this? When they notice that this fire is developing much faster than they anticipated. So all of a sudden it's kind of a bit of chaos, like, okay, yeah, this is going to be a problem. So there's this big problem and the leader of the group says, drop your tools, and he starts lighting a fire underneath their feet. The moment that the leader says, drop your tools and start lighting a fire, that's the moment where these students or firemen at that moment, okay, if I don't have my tools, I'm not a fireman anymore. And then they interpret his actions as he went crazy. Like, we're now not firemen anymore. We are people in danger. He starts lighting a fire right here. I should start running. So that's where he kind of outlines how the way you view yourself, how it can impact your behavior and how you make sense of the world. So they didn't, so they started running. They all died, unfortunately, except of the leader who, so it's just a great example of how the way that you view yourself, and if I don't have my tools, am I still a fireman? How it impacts your behavior. That's why I think identity is relevant in this.
On the one hand side, if you stand in the mirror every single day and you say, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm going to take over the world, then at some point you really start to believe it. But of course, as a newcomer entrepreneur, you are constantly up against this mass of people who tell you you are a refugee and you first need to do this before I start trusting you. So really nobody around you is telling you that you can do it. This is this sort of identity empowerment that we at Forward also want to give, which is why in our programs they are called entrepreneurs. And we really want to give this feeling of you can do it. So they don't have to be the only ones that have to stand in front of a mirror and say, I can do it to themselves every day, but that they're having it mirrored by somebody else as well.
Exactly, yeah. I see two things kind of happening at Forward in this sense. So according to the literature, identities, it has two elements. It has this role identity and social identity. Now, role identity, it's part of the answer to the question, who am I, that I derive from my role. So my role as, or can be as a PhD student, can be as a bigger brother, as a son, or whatever. And then you have social identity, which is the part of the answer to the question, who am I, that you derive from the way other people see you. So if people think that in generally I am a nice person, then I myself might think of myself as a nice person, right? It's kind of a feedback thing that you get from other people, or the way I see myself reflected in other people's eyes. For newcomers, they're kind of stripped from those things on both sides, or there's a lot of changes happening on both sides. Role identity wise, well, maybe I used to be a lawyer. I am not really a lawyer anymore. At least I cannot practice my occupation in the Netherlands. So role identity problems. And then social identity, yeah, I might have the feeling that people don't always look at me so positively because I have this label refugee and I belong to that group. So yeah, there's a lot of things that they have to cope with. And as you say, at Forward, what I have observed, there's a lot of positive things happening. Well, role identity wise, you kind of give them they're now entrepreneurs. They have their a role that they have. Social identity wise, you kind of have a new label, right? So I am now part of entrepreneurs, not part of refugee. So I can give you a list of the things I have observed, if you like.
Yes, I'd be delighted to. We can end with this, with the number of positive things that the entrepreneurs at Forward encounter when they go through our programs, and how our programs can help overcome that stigmatization that newcomers face when they first arrive.
I feel like I have to put a disclaimer here. These are my observations. These are the things that I found. This might not be for everyone, and not everyone might identify with these things that I say or whatever. It's not
spoken like a true academic.
Sorry, I had to say it.
I mean, in general, every experience is individual.
From what I found in these interviews and these observations that I have, is at Forward emphasizes the individual and not the group that they belong to, right? So you are there because of you. Then secondly, at Forward, they encourage agency and they encourage like proactive behavior. Entrepreneurs are the team leaders, right? And they set the goals, and we as a team, we pursue those goals. You feel productive, again, working on your own business. Before, if you are on social welfare and you might be struggling to find a job, here you have this feeling of, okay, I can contribute to society, I can launch my own business. The label, I guess we mentioned it already a little, but the label, the thing that we call people at Forward is entrepreneurs. They are entrepreneurs, right? They're not there as refugees, which is, I guess, why we also switched to newcomers, from refugees to newcomers. And then it expands people's network with a lot of positively minded people, people that see the best in these entrepreneurs. And finally, what I've observed is that it orients people towards the future. A drastic experience to leave your country and leave a lot behind. It leaves an impact, and here you can orient yourself towards the future, towards the possibilities and opportunities that are ahead. So yeah, that's some of the things I have observed.
I think also in people, when you start putting a new label on them, they can also gain ownership of that. So I see a lot of the times in our programs, people come as newcomers, but they leave as entrepreneurs. And even though not everybody necessarily goes on to start their own business, it was still these 4 months of leading your entire team, working on a business idea, seeing if it's feasible, a lot of participants in the programs highly appreciate. I want to end on your 3 tops, tips and tricks when it comes to engaging with newcomer entrepreneurs.
It's tough because, of course, the things that we have talked about, they're so fuzzy and they're not really like, yeah, so to really translate that into practical things is hard. But I just hope with this findings or these insights with this story is to give people a perspective and an understanding. If you ever encounter a situation in working together with people and you identify some of the things that we've spoken to that increases your understanding, I would say what really helps is break things down into smaller steps with shorter time horizons. Because I guess in light of everything that we spoke of, giving someone a really big task and then it's like, okay, that's the goal. How do we get there? I mean, that can be a daunting thing. Celebrate success and attribute that success where success is due, of course, which is, of course, with the entrepreneurs. And be explicit about that. I guess people in general, all of us, we find it hard to see our own growth and our own developments, right? We don't easily give ourselves a pat on the shoulders. And I'm saying I'm not saying you should do this out of pity, but you'll see growth at Forward, and it's nice to look at that, you know. I mean, I guess that would be my number 1 tip to do.
All right, perfect. On that note, we're wrapping up another episode of Forward Talks. Joris, thank you so much for being here today with me and walking me through what it means as a newcomer entrepreneur to struggle with identity, but also how the volunteers working in our programs can help them overcome this identity problem and how you can enable them to be even better entrepreneurs than they already are.
It was lovely to hear. Thank you, Leah.
Thank you, Joris. Talk to you soon.
Definitely.
Bye.